Alright, section 5, traction generator. 7. The generator is designed especially for the traction purpose of the armature with flexibility connected with the internal combustion engine. The generator rotates counterclockwise direction, locating with the commutator end of single excitation field with itself separated with the excited with the battery, giving the correct proportion excitation with the varied loads so that it matches the engine output of the curve of the throttle position. 71. Ventilation of the generator is cooled with the air drawn with the machine by the fan, but therefore the essential precision amount of the cool, clean air is provided with the revision made with the preventive of the recirculation with the exhaust. Adequate ventilation will not be obtained unless the fan discharge vent against the pressure no greater than the intake pressure. 72. Inspection. Apparatus should be inspected enough to prevent failures in the surface. This should include the examination following the items: cleaning, communicator brushes, brush holders, lubrication, and field coils and connections. 73. Cleaning. It is essential for the apparatus to clean at all times. The machine should be blown with the dry compressed air at least once a month. Approximately every 6 months, the insulation commuter catheter should be cleaned when dried and painted with the varnish. Electrical insulation conform to the military specification MIL V1137A. The brush holders support the insulator should be wiped and cleaned. The accumulations of the oil and dirt should be removed. After cleaning, examine the conditions of the isolation varnish. Checked for the flagged and blistered. The parts should be treated with the varnish and describe the maintenance instruction. Disassemble the generator. To remove the generator from the engine, the first remove the engine generator for the set with the locomotive, then place the fiber of the press board shim into the air gap of the generator so that the armature will not drop down on the pole plate pieces with the direct, which when disconnected. Disconnect all the cables from the set. Remove the 10 bolts from the engine, the side of the flywheel. Join the flywheel with the coupling working through the opening with the belt housing at 1 bolt at a time. With the engine blocked up on a hoist on the generator, remove the 16 bolt or 21. The generator should be drawn forward so that the coolant cleaner clears the engine with it, after which may be hoisted up and carriage should be exercised, keeping loose and parts blocked up and preventing upset set falling. This is also figure 8. B. To remove the armature frame for the first lift of the brushes, wrap the heavy part paper around the communicator surface protected. Remove the pulley of the shaft extension using suitable puller. Disassemble the cap screw 29, lock washer 28, and end plate 27. Remove the 6 inner cap to 27 and inner cap screws 7, and then divide the 2 jack screws, 2 tapped holes in the end plate 10. The possible push the bearing housing assembly out of its fit into the magnet frame. The armature may be removed through the engine end of the frame. The care should be exercised handling the parts not to damage them, particularly with the windings and commutator. To remove the generator, first remove the key for the shaft to pull off the sleeves. To use the suitable puller, figure 11 to unscrew the 2 flathead machine screws holding the 5 and 2. Remove the bearing cap 5. Remove the outer filling flange 3, and using suitable puller, figure 11 with the standing studs engage the tap holes with the bolt 7 and were moved into the possible. Remove the bearings 4 and complete with the inner bearing caps 2 and the inner flanger 3 with the shaft. 75. Care maintenance. Field coils. When field coils are removed, the provision should be made to keep each of the pole and coil accompanying with the shimmers together. To remove the field coil, disconnect the cables. Remove the bolts which hold the pole of the frame. To remove the pole with the coil through the end of the frame. The main field's coil can be replied with by slipped oil off the pole with the communication coils built in integral with the pole. That should be handled as the unit. The condition of the insulation varnish surface on the field coils should be examined. When necessary, the following treatment should be given: the paint and preferably a heat coil up to 110 degrees Celsius or 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Dip will dip while hot and varnish electrically insulated to conform to the MIL V1137A. Drain thoroughly with the brake for 8 hours at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. 20 degrees Celsius, 248 degrees Fahrenheit. Before reassembling the terminals, contact the surface of the poles should be cleaned with assembling of the being filled with the new coils, and coils having it being dipped should be assembled into the frame while hot. The hot coils will be more given to allow the pulling down of the poles with tightly against the frame. Poles accompanying the shim to be placed in the original position. Whenever the pole pieces are removed, the new lock washer should be provided with upon assembly. 7. After the coils reassembled carefully should be taken the cables properly connected. Connections may be tightened. Refer to the general connection diagram figure 10. Carefully check the coil polarity. B. The brush and brush holders. A periodic installation of the brush and brush holders should be made, but the following points should be observed. Alright, this is your longitudinal section of the generator G2558. It looks cut off by the paper. Here is the outline of the generator G2558. You have your 16 holes equal in your coupling tampered holes. It's generator. Your left leads on the left hand side facing the communicator end. Brushes should move freely with the holders not stuck on and with dirt without the foreign substances raised lower of the brush. If the carbon weight to release any of the dirt accumulated with the care should be taken out to snap the ring as this may cause chip the brush. Replace the brushes that have been chipped or worn excessively with the same grade of the brush or equal, especially with the true on and the partial replacement made with the two widely different the kind of the brushes of the same machine. May terminate with a successful operation. When the new brushes are put in, they should be fitted to the communicator by sandpapering. If only the few brushes are fitted with a piece of sandpaper inserted under the brush, draw the direction of the rotation left of the brush when moving the paper back and keep the paper close to the communicator to avoid roughing the edges of the brush. Alright, this is for your puller generator tool, GT558. When a couple set of the brushes is to be fitted with when the conditions are permanent, wrap the sleeves of sandpaper around the communicator, rotating the armature proper to the direction sandpaper being placed in the place. Rotate the communicator. Refer to Figure 12 with the method of sanding. Figure 12 shows the method of sanding without obtaining the brush pressure. The spring balance communicator, the strip of the paper and the brush, the rotation of the armature, the cut of the sandpaper, cut sandpaper this shape, place the sandpaper this way. The brush is rotating the armature and 5. Proper brush pressure should be maintained as specified in paragraph 80D. It is important that all the brushes adjust with the same pressure on the equal. The brush pressure will cause the unequal current with the distribution of the brush. Refer to Figure 12 for the method of measuring the brushes. 6. Maintaining 1/8 of an inch clearance between the bottom of the brush hole with the communicator with the support arranged with such a way that the brush hole studs may be toward with the communicator. Surface the communicator wears in turn with maintenance for the 1/8 of an inch clearance between the face of the brush holder. The communicated brush holder should be rigidly bottled and bolted in place. The pigtails of the carbon brushes should be arranged so that they become clear. The communicator rises with the armature of the winding in the body of the finger for its finger. The communicator should be present with the polished surface of the free pitting becomes pitted with the arcing of the brush. That should be cleansed for fine sanding paper. The non-carbonized emery stone with the stone communicator with extreme care should be taken to keep the copper dust from windings using the cardboard shield or some other means of fan outlets of the main generator must be covered to keep from sucking the dust into the machine. After stoning, the sanding machine should be carefully blown out with the dry compressed air. 3. 2. If the communicator is badly burned or badly worn or badly burned, the armature should be placed in the lathe. Communicator should be turned enough to give the uniform surface before turning the communicator. Suitable head with the covering that should be placed from the other over the end of the winding to prevent the chipping of the warning. Working with the armature while turning the peripheral speed of the communicator surface should be 300 feet per minute. Round off the ends of the communicator segment at least 1/16 of an inch radius for the file. 3. After the communicator has been turned, the side of the Mako should be governed with should be grooved with the depth shown with the figure shown in paragraph 80F. Special saws available for the purpose. Do not cut the slots to the wide. The sharp edge for the bolt bars should be removed with the hand scraper of the knife. Do not bevel the segments. Remove all the mica and inspect with the see that no copper clips remain. The final punishing with a fine grave of the sandpaper is recommended. Do not apply lubricant to the communicator to this detrimental to the operation. The communicator is not kept clean, free of the grease or oil. The carbon dust will connect the groove between the segments and will tend to cause short circuit. D. Armature. The armature should be closely inspected with the condition of the band and coil of the insulation generally assembled with the communicator. The armature band should be tight and secure. Soldering of the bands should be intact. If the solder has been thrown off of the contact, they could cause the determined corrective of the band replaced. The coil insulation should be cleaned with free of the blister flakes and cracked insulation varnish, surface of which, when the condition insulating the varnish on the arm is such that the treatment is necessary to heat the treatment up to 100 degrees Celsius or 220 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. The dip of the insulated with the varnish in the specific gravity of 1.15 and 1.18. 30 degrees Celsius through the draining excess of accumulated varnish and varnish and bake for 24 hours. Oven and temperature 120 degrees to 125 degrees Celsius, 248 degrees, 257 degrees Fahrenheit. Balance. The armature dynamically balanced at the factory, if any, done with the armature, which will any disturb the balance, if it should be rebalanced dynamically with the best performance. Lubrication. F. The generator roller bearing is greasily lubricated with the grease fitting that should be examined with regulator to see if it does not damage to allow the dirt and entering before the bearing before the grease and the fitting should be wiped off clear so that no forced dirt will be in the bearing with the grease. The amount of lubrication depends largely on the surface requirements of the grease. Should be added periodically, not excessively at all. With work out with the housing to be thrown off the determinant of the unit, which will get its brusher and communicator windings and clogs ventilating passage. As conditions dictate, the bearing assembly should be taken thoroughly cleaned by the kerosene and similar solvent for the purpose of the removal. Removing the accumulation of the old and hardened grease before bearing and housing and grease passages. 5. Self-aligning centrifugal bearing in the main generator should be carefully examined, turning the inner race of the rollers concave to the right angle. The outer race should be similarly expanded. If the opinion of the examiner in bearing condition is questionable, the new bearing should be installed with the steps taken to questionable bearing and the reconditioned and scraped. 6. Immediately after the bearings have been cleaned in the solvent, there should be further wash in light mineral lubrication oil of this SAE 10 grade. This is to prevent corrosion for the highly polished surface. One bearing component is the clean and dry repack with the fresh grease. When reassembling the package during the compartment, the 2/3 full. It's recommended the regular greasing schedule should be established after accomplishing the determined frequency amount of the lubrication required for the particular surface of equipment is platform lubrication order 551263 in figure 50. 9. In general experiences has shown that the main generator bearing needs approximately 1 ounce of grease added in frequent intervals. 76. Reassembly. General reassembly procedure of the reverse of the disassembly procedures outlined above. The care should be taken in the assembling pairing parts to prevent the scoring of the engagement and surfacing of the tight-fitting parts. 77. Testing of the repairs. Generators that also have been repaired with all the running surfaces must be given over the 1/2 of the voltage specified with the high potential test for the new machine. The for many generator armatures communicating field and starting field using not over 1200 volts from the main generator shunt field using not over 550 volts. This shows your armature insulation generator. GT558. Alright, 78. Inspection and repairs. After the repairs have been made, with a careful check should be made with the foreign matter remains in the machine. That there are no loose brushes without the obstruction of the communicator. Check the connections with the communication diagram in figure 10. See that all the bolts are drawn up tightly and locked. 79. Locating trouble. Armature heating. The armature heating may result with any of the following causes: overloading, inadequate ventilation, partial short circuit of the two coils, heating of the two coils, affected the short circuit of the grounds and the armature winding with the communicator, bad communication, consequently with the large circulation currents from the armature coils undergoing communication. In general, the heating of the armature may be caused by the unequal air gap, the reverse field coil, the short circuit of the ground field coil. The field coils operating of the field coils may result from the following causes: partial short circuit of one or more coils, faulty insulation, improper connections. 3. Check with the connection field coils within the generator connection figure diagram figure 10. The check with the reserve field coil by excising the fields with more than some of the source of the battery accessory, holding the 2 iron rods against the adjacent pole of the tip the way around all the way around the free ends of the rod should be attract each other. The faulty coil may be detected exciting the fields from some source, taking the voltage drop across each of the coils separately and variation over the 10% of the drop indicating the faulty coil. It should be noted that the main generator, more than one winding of each of the pole carriers should be taken to see if the correct terminals are used. Consult with the cable connection, drawing communicator heating. Excessive temperature on the communicator is generally caused by the following: heavy overload or prolonged period, sparking at the brushes, improper brush pressure, poor condition of the communicator, black and roughened surface increased with the brush friction and the contact of the drop, both within the caused increased temperature. Contact heating. Bolting contacts may heat if contact surfaces are not clean, smooth, and bolted together with sufficient pressure. See the contacts, the connection, strip, the tight. Poor communication, sparking the brush may be due to any of the following: excessive overload, brush that may not be fitted with the surface. The communicated brushes may not have only the proper pressure, but the pressure may not be on the same of all brushes. Brushes may bind in the holders. Brushes may be reached at their limit of wear. Brushes may burn at the end. The communicator may be dirty, oil, rough, or worn out. The communicator bar may be looser and may project above the others. High mica ground, shorted, circulated armature coils, loose connection between the armature leads, communicator flip bar, flat spots, of communicator out of true, and armature badly out of balance. 80. The maintenance data type GT558G1 generator. Classification 6-pole DC communication pole type generator. The nominal rating of the traction purpose with input of 165 horsepower at 180 RPMs. Resistance at 25 degrees Celsius. Shunt field to 10.2 ohms. Communicating field is 0.00321 ohms. And starting field is 0.0218 ohms. Your brush status, Pressure 52-62 obs per brush. Size 5 1/8 mash by 1 1/4 inch by 1 15/16 of an inch long. 12. The grader is GE377. Average air gap excitation 0.0772 inches. Communicating 0.126 inches. Communicating slide mica groove depth 3 64th inch. Thickness of 5/100 of an inch. Brake grease capacity 2 3/4 2 3/3 full of 9 ounces. Weight of the entire unit without coupling at 1,830 pounds. Section 5. Traction motor of the type GHM 838 D1 250 volt meter. General, the GHM 8380 D1 motor with the 4-pole direct current with the communicating poles is designed with the operation of either the fully enclosed with the force of ventilation force of the box and the type of the armature carried up the rolling bearings separated with the frame heads bolted with the frame motor suspension bearings are in the split sleeve with lubricated with the oil point. Oil in the waste part, packed axle caps. A single reduction gear is enclosed with the spill type of the gear with the tube brush accessible through the communicator. Cover the connection resistant brush pressure wearing limits, etc. Refer to the paragraph 94. 82. Lubrication armature bearings. For the lubrication bearings, refer to the lubrication order 551263. Figure 50. The lubrication is added to the bearings for the exclusion with the dirt from the bearing house. The lubrication is very important. The amount of the grease that frequently in which there should be a dependent with the large, rarely in the characteristic with the surface and hours of operation per day of the operating temperature of the motor and the bearings. Communicator ending the bearing after 6 months of the operation. Move the communicator end of the cover. They're using every precaution to prevent the dirt from entering the bearing of the chambers. If the end of the cover is found with containing the excessive amount of the grease more than 60% of the available space, over lubrication is indicated. Over lubrication is indicated with the grease fluid without the edge of the communicator cap. If the end of the cover contains the very small amount of the grease, the under the lubrication is indicated before the reassembling. End of the cover to clean out with the old grease to fill with the fresh grease and not more than 60% of the available space. Pinion end bearing. It's obviously not practical to remove the end of the cover for the purpose of checking the grease and schedule the quantity of the grease found to be correct, but the communicator for the end of the bearing should be adequate. Also to be in the pinion end of the bearing. Over lubrication of the pinion end of the bearing indicated with the grease throwing the armature flange may be inspected after removing the one of the vent hole for the cover of the frame of the frame head. Axle bearing. The lubrication of the bearings depending on the capillary action feeding with the oil with the reserve of the general surface of the axle, long fiber, all worn yarn is most desirable bearing package. The individual piece of the yarn should be at least 12 inches long. To ensure initial lubrication of the bearings of the packing, packing previously should be thoroughly saturated with the oil, unless securely and special provisions is made, but the saturating of the packing should be soaked with the oil for at least 48 hours and drained for about 24 hours at 16 Celsius, 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Since all the oil will clam up the straight up the strands, packing the yarn faster with the passing through the number of the wads and packing desirable packing may be in the form of the wicking of the housing. The large wick, the easier it will be necessary to oil reach the journal. The pieces of the packing required for the wicks and axle bearings should be made with the skin formed to sufficient length to reach at the bottom of the waste chamber to about 6 inches above the seat of the waste chamber. Cover the skeins and should be then twisted and but one with the complete turn in order to hold all of the strands of the yarn in place and produce the more springy wick and as many skins as possible packed in the waste chamber, starting the inner with the end of the bearings, working the outward, allowing the upward end of the skeins to hang out over the teeth. Will cover the 6 inches and enough to hold them in place. Alright, I'm going to go over these pictures real quick. Alright, this is your outline of the GHM oil motor. Your length longitude section of GHM motor, and then we're going to go back. Alright. After the wick is formed with the chamber that should be pressed over the horizontally tight against the axle means with the suitable packing, the iron held with the place with the force and necessary additional packing behind it. Loose upper ends with the skeins with the wick which should be fouled over the waist with the tamp down tightly. And a pad over the saturated waist large enough to fill the remainder of the waste chamber that should be placed on the top of the wick to catch the hold of the dirt which might fall when the axle cap cover is open. The oil is poured into the filling chamber of the axle with the cap provided with the purpose for the depth of the oil that may be gauge means with the sticking out the ruler placed in the chamber. Oil should be supplied to the depth of the core corresponding oil level, which is at 1/8 of an inch higher than the lowest point of the axle journal. The depth should be not exceeding in order to prevent oil running out through the bearing. Refer to lubrication order 55-1263, figure 50, lubrication instruction E, general gear. The gear lubrication should be heavy enough to maintain the protective film of the tire even under heavy loads. 83, inspection once a month. Countersink with the pole piece of the holes with the top of the frame with the filled with the compound to prevent the water leaking in the motor. If the compound is broken, the pole bolts should be tightened and the holes should be cleaned with the new compound is poured in. Check the tightness in the axle cap of the bolts to prevent the wear of the axle cap, resulting in the spread of the gear centering distance, consequently failure of the gear. Check the lubrication according with the instruction given in paragraph 82. Check the bearing of the bearing wear in accordance with the paragraph 94. Inspection of the brush hole of the crack holders insulated with the warm brushes tightened into the internals and shut in the brush pressure in the C, paragraph 94. Note the general internal cleanness of the motor, clean out with the dirt cloth and blown out with the compressor air, not an appearance for the communicator, and excessive amounts of the grease oil that is found inside the motor steps should be taken to correct this condition. Alright, this shows figure 16 shows your connection diagram for your GHMM motor. Keyway of the Milka axle side communication infield. Alright, check for tightness of the connection and cable should be securely tightened. 84, repack of the bearings. At intervals of form 1 to 2 years, depending on the surface condition, the bearings should be removed entirely with the cleaning of the inspection. Remove the old grease and cleaning of the bearings. Grease chamber thoroughly with kerosene or other petroleum cleaner with the repack the grease. This is important. If the grease runs too long without the renewal, it will lose most of the lubrication quality. At about 10,000 miles, usually every 4 to 6 months, the axle bearings should be repacked with new waste. 85, gear cover. When the motor is overhauled with the cleaning of the gear cover thoroughly, do not burn the grease out of the cover while warp out the shape. It will warp out the shape and allow the dirt to enter. 86, brush holder and brushless communicator. The brush should never be allowed to wear the short of the air's nitro level with the striking the bottom of the slot with the carbon weight. Spring pressure should be maintained with the valve and given with the paragraph 94. The pressure should be sufficient to give good contact with the communicator without causing effective direction that you obtain with the good contact of the surface. We use the fine grade of the sandpaper, place the rough side of the sandpaper next to the brush and pull away slowly with the brush under the ordinary pressure. Wipe off the communicator end of after fitting the brush to blow out the communicator compressed air. Keep the brush air insulated with clean, but do not sand it in. B. The communicator fissure should be prevented with the polished surface, the free pinning with the magnet between the copper segments initially grooved with the depth of the 3/64th of an inch with the wear of the communicator maintained with the groove. The high Milka will spoil the brush fit when the communicator can cause sparking. This communicator becomes black and pitted with the arcing of the brushes. Should be cleaned with the fine sandpaper. The communicator stone with the blown out with the compressed air with the care should be taken. The process does not leave the communicator out of the round. The communicator excessively warm with the burn of the armature should be placed in the lap. The current copper to turned down just enough to give the uniform surface, after which the mica must be grooved in doing this to protect the windings from flying copper chips. Communicator sliding machines, special saws available to grooving of the main cover. Do not cut the slots for the too wide. The grooving carefully with the scrape out the slots for the increase to them to see the new copper chip to remain. Important to also round off the end of the communicator bar to 1/16 of an inch radius to break off the sharp edge of the bar. Do not apply with lubricating of the communicator at the brushes as or composed with the self-lubricating oil collected on the communicator will carbonize, become the conductive when the lodge and the groove to aggravate the short circuit between the bars, maintaining the clearance of 1/8 of an inch. At 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch between the bottom of the edge of the carbon way and the communicator surface, keeping the brush holders rigidly bolted in position. 87, the pinion removal pinion, refer to figure 17. Pinion assembly 88. They're thoroughly clean the taper of the shaft and bore with the pinion using the carbon tetrachloride to remove the trace of oil and grease. Inspect the shaft to be upset with the metal of the end of the taper other than nicks, which should correct. Corrected to obtain the perfect fit. Inspect the bore of the pinion for the possible damage. The pinion should be at least 80% perfect fit of the shaft. Mounting the cold pinion, placing it in the shaft with the snapping the position into the hand, making the cold position the pinion of the shaft using a micrometer depth gauge. Mark at the circumference of the pinion, 2 places with the depth of the gauge resting in the made accuracy to determine the final pinion advance in the middles. E. The removal of the pin shaft and marks and so that the same pinion finally mounted with the same shaft. The heat of the pinion is suitable of the temperature of approximately 130 degrees Celsius above the shaft temperature and opinion for the heat of the oil. The bore should be cleaned thoroughly with the carbon tetrachloride to avoid complication for the use of the oven, and recommended instead of heating the oil, the small electrical oven, such as the household appliance roasters, may be used. The care should be taken to never to heat the pinion to move the 190 degrees Celsius. Total temperature of the pinion will be annealed. In no case of showing the boiling water to be used. The heat of the pinion, the temperature is rise to the boiling water approximately 80 degrees Celsius. The entirely too low would result in pinion slippage. It's recommended the pinion heat of the few degrees required for the temperature after the thermometer using the putty over the bowl weight of the pinion with the cool for the temperature required. Quickly remove the thermometer, mount the pinion without delay as described below. Place the header pinion on the same shaft as with the check with regard with the cold position D above without the delay. Snap the pinion in position by hand without using the use of the hammer to control the stress of the pinion, resulting in the mounting to advance with the cold position. Hot position along the axis of the shaft should be held within limits of the 500 of an inch to 55 thousandths of an inch. Actually, advanced should be checked with the micrometer. The depth of the gauge from the same point with the circumference with it when we use measuring the cold position D above. The temperature rising given after the above should be used. The guide with maybe have verified slightly depending on any conditions obtaining the advance within the limits specified above. The advance is not within those limits. The pinion should be pulled and remounted. Alright, your pinion removal. The removal of the pinion nut applied with the 4 wedges. These are included with the motor tools. 1. 2. Wedges must be smooth and free of the dirt and paint, and cover the wedges coating of the cup with the grease and facility. Slide action under the heavy pressure. The wedges should be assembled, shown in the illustration, i.e. they are driven molded by B at the top of the next motor. Apply the wedges and closer to the shaft as possible to prevent damage to the seal. The portion of the shrink of the ring with the hub of the shrink of the ring is in solid. Pack the inner race of the bearing with the armature spider. You're not driving the wedges which are adjacent to the pinion. These should be the stationary acting the filler pieces. 6. The wedges adjacent to the motor should be driven with the ordinary machinist's hammer, if possible, simultaneously by 2-minute application with the hammer blows, as indicated by the arrows will force the pinion off the shaft. If duty inaccessible under locomotive is impossible to assemble the wedges vertically as shown, any more convenient angle may be used. This does not affect any of the detail of the assembly. It may also be necessary to remove one or more of the end of the cup of the bolt whenever there was interference with the operation of the wedges. Figure 17 is the method of removing the pinion from the GHM motor. You have your end cover, shrinking ring wedges, pins in section A, wedge pinion, and wedge. Alright, J. After the pinion is mounted, assemble the lock washer nut. This should be firmly tightened with the locks and speed. The not required for the assembling of these parts because of the speed. The pinion will stay in the exact position reached by the snap on the shaft. The advance of the reading will be taken without the lock washer nuts. 89. Armature removal. The armature removal is sliding over through the pinion end of the frame to perform the not necessary to remove the pinion with the frame head with the bearings at these parts. Remove the unit with the armature first. Remove the communicator at the end of the frame with the overhead order to be able to support the armature properly with the sliding in out with avoiding the striking the oil. Only the pole piece of the damaging the arm is wanted. Remove the communicator end of the frame head and remove the frame head bolts with the pull the frame head out of the frame with using the 2 3/4 inch bolt. The communicator end of the armature bearing with the hay roller bearing is inseparable with some of the communicator frame head with the hammer readily drawn out of the armature supported with the rope around the communicator D. Before sliding the armature out, be sure that the brushes are removed the armature properly supported with the communicator end of the suitable pipe over the shaft excitation. E. Remove the bolts holding the pinion with the frame head over the motor frame using 2 3/4 inch bolts to draw the armature of the pinion frame head out of the bearing out of the motor frame. 90. Remove the pinhead frame head bearings from the armature. Remove the pinhead. Describe the figure 17. Remove the bearing retaining the ring was shrunk with the armature with the suitable puller parts with the furnished with the motor tools. These parts are arranged for the pulling of the shrinking the range with a similar setup of the pull over the frame head with the bearings. Remove the end of the cover that was bolted with the frame head with the mounting with the puller. Pull the frame head together with the bearing the returning over the taping of the jacking screw. 91. Reassembling of the motors. Roller bearings should be taken apart with the throttling thoroughly cleaned in kerosene or other petroleum. Cleaner in addition with the visual inspection of the bearings, they should be checked with the defects, rotating with the handle, the feeling with the grit, and the binding immediately after the bearings have been cleaned and solvent. They should be further washed in light mineral lubrication of the SA10 with a great heat with the temperature 90 degrees Celsius. B. The repacking the bearings over the fresh grease lubrication 551263. Slipping the pinion end of the frame over the shaft to press the bearings in position against the shoulder, exerting the pressure against the inner bearing race. Do not hammer directly against the race. The bolt end of the cover of the frame with the head of the string. The bearing of the retaining the ring for the shaft of the forcing it tight against the inner bearing of the race if possible. Shrinking the ring temperature should be approximately 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit. Inserting the arm frame with being careful not to striking the pole piece of the vehicle as the brush holder draw. The pinion frame head bolts up tightly, slightly. Communicator end of the frame head with the rolling bearings in position, bolting the frame head tightly to the frame. Reassemble the communicator end of the cover of the frame head. Reinsert the brushes. Hit the brushes the communicators if required. 92. Overheating. Before removing the motor with the truck, noted with the Alamo, the clearance between the axle bearing and the flange of the wheel hub, they replace the axle bearings and linings if necessary. Check the air gap between the motor bearing wear. Dismount the gear of the case throughout the cleaning with the putting of the fresh grease. Reassemble the drain of the oil from the axle bearing with the remove the old waste. Clean the oil chamber when assembling the repack the axle bearings. Remove the armature with the frame head, pull off the pinion, pull off the bearings, clean them. The inspection thoroughly with the clean armature, inspect the billet binding with the insulation for the loose of the breakage. Given the armature, including the communicator, striking the band with the coat of the insulating varnish in facilities available. The dip armature for the insulating varnish bake into overnight at 100 degrees Celsius or 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, mount the armature and lathe on the sand with the communicator if required necessary to make the light with the cut across the surface of speed 300 feet per minimum. Groove with the side Mickey of the depth of the 3/64 of inch. Clean over the groove the outside of the end of the communicator bars and make sure there are no short circuits between the bars. Inspect the brush holes for the crack of the porcelain warm carbon waste with the weak springs to replace the necessary parts of one of the simply make sure that the brush holes are the proper distance with the communicator. Install the new brushes that require. Remove the field cleans. Field coils clean deep and with the varnish for the electrical insulation conform with the Mil V1137A. The coil should be made with 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit with 9 hours of replacing the coils. Make sure the terminals are adequate. Surrounded with the putty and tape. Cleaning the inside of the frame. Pouring paint with the insulation varnish with the specified above. And make sure that all the motor lead with the connections are tight, and after the coils are reassembled, apply the additional coat of varnish, field coils, and pole pieces, and springs and flanges and cables. Reassemble see all the nuts of the bolts are tightly covered the fastener outside of the bearings are packed with the fresh waste from the armature of the bearings, repack with the fresh grease with the bore hands of the free from heads with the end of the sealing grease. Make sure that the cables are securely tied with the fresh brush pigtails adjusted to prevent the short circuit of the motor frame. To exclude the water fill the countersink with the top of the pole with the flush with the frame with the sealing compound. 93. Repair armatures. The armatures are subject to duty of the most severe characteristics. They be careful will eventually fail. And serve the purpose of these instruction outlined with the correct methods of repairing armatures, insulated fabrication, insulation, in which such a way that when they again put into the service satisfactory results will be assured. Inspection thoroughly examine the armature external damage laminations of the core and insulation of the coils. Look at the communicator carefully as you see that the surface is not scored otherwise injured. And 2. Inspect the grounds applying the 1000-volt AC test between the segments of the armature core. The partial ground existing the location cut and usually detects the smoke when application voltage is sustained. In short-circuited coils, they are usually be located with the surface of communicator segments into which they are connected, generally blackened or pitted. If, however, there is no external evidence of the shortened coil of the upper layer of the all load should be disconnected with the communicator, then the 125-volt lamp in series, the 125-volt DC bar-to-bar test should be made located. But disconnecting the communicator, remove the bands over the conductor of the communicator end of the disconnect the coil end of the communicator. This may be done with the coil method using the wedge-shaped drift to the force of lead out of the slot by hot method, usually a soldering copper. The cold method use the drift that should be slightly narrower than the slot communicator bar. Copper segments will not be damaged after all the leads have been disconnected from the communicator. The ground may be located with each of the coil with each of the communicator segment can be tested with the insulation of the ground. Repair the communicator if the trouble is found with the communicator. Clean the exposed surface thoroughly with examine the defective bars. Repair may be made with the apply the bar to bar test of 125 volts direct current with the lamp and circle after making the repair of the communicator. D. Stripping the armature. If trouble is found with the coils, stripping them with from the core. Proceed as follows: raise all the top members of the coils out of the slot first, then pull them back at one at a time, thereby removing the bottom members and successful around the core. in succession around the core. Insulating the core. The core insulation needed not to be removed in good condition. Should be given a few coats of the varnishing conforming to the Mill V1137A, followed by the baking insulation damaged badly, shard, or removing the replacement of the new core insulation. Core insulation may be obtained ready cut to shape in the exact quantity of the point necessary pieces necessary to re-insulation over the armature core. The useless shellac one cementing should be the core piece of the cut insulation layer, the binding with the tape used by the building up the space and forming the coiled seat. Finish the surface with at least 2 applications of shellac as directed above. There, thoroughly inspect the lamination constitute with the core proper. Repair any of the uneven damaged portions of the slats perfectly smooth than any of the protection metal into the slat with maybe injured insulation coils when they are being assembled in the core. 94. Maintenance of the data type GHM83 D1 250 volt motor. The resistance to 25 degrees Celsius exertion field is 0.0117 and the communication field 0.0097 ohms. Armature 0.195 ohms. Total 0.0409 ohms. Limit of the bearing wear. Armature bearings. The rolling bearings not measurable can be given the bearing. Given these bearings are to be replaced as soon as they appear, allowing the radial motion shaft approximately 0 to 200 inch total. Suspension bearings. The axle lining should be replaced with the total end of the play of the motor. Excessive 5/16 of an inch total clearance of the diameter exceeds 330 seconds in order to restrict the speed of the gear center of the resulting rapid wear of the gear. Gearing. Brushing pressure 7.5 to 8 pounds. Permanent armature brown binding using 10 steel wire. Size binding wire 0.072 thousandth of an inch. Pound tension end bands 450 to 500 pounds. Core bands 250 to 300 pounds. Section 7 control equipment.